Who do you think is really concerned about taxpayers' concern? Now, 122 essential service providers' licenses are being cancelled. Who is responsible for this? Second generation, third generation, generations of scams comes and goes. What is the reason for this? Is there a way out? Welcome once again to News Analysis. News Analysis is a weekly magazine on current affairs. To begin with, the main points in a nutshell. Russia threatens UN veto over Syria resolution. Egypt unrest, 2 shot dead in clashes after football deaths. Malaria deaths hugely underestimated, Lancet study. Life term for Cambodia Khmer Rouge jailer Duch. Pakistan fails to send team to probe Mumbai attacks. Supreme Court cancels 122 telecom licenses. And now the news in detail. Russia threatens UN veto over Syria resolution. Russia has threatened to veto a UN Security Council resolution on Syria if it is put to a veto on Friday, diplomats say. Russian officials say they need more time to consult Moscow. BBC UN correspondent Barbara Plett reports. Meanwhile, a new draft resolution is to be sent back to governments for further deliberation. The wording has already been watered down and in an apparent attempt to overcome Russian objections. The new text drops explicit calls for President Bashar al-Assad to yield powers to a deputy to oversee a political transition. His stepping down is a key part of an Arab League plan to end the Syria crisis, but Moscow insists such a move would amount to regime change imposed from outside. Diplomats said Russian Ambassador Vitaly Churkin made a latest announcement at a closed-door meeting of the Council. Earlier on Thursday, some envoys said the Council was close to an agreement on the draft. Despite the latest Russian objections, our correspondent says a veto-ready version of the revised text will be prepared and sent to capitals later on Thursday. It's hoped that the high-level decision can then be taken that would allow a vote as soon as possible, she adds. Colombian UN Ambassador Nestor Osorio told journalists that talk would continue on Friday. The UN Security Council began negotiations on Wednesday after a high-level meeting urged the Council to back the Arab League plan. Russia, a key ally of Syria, has continued to supply weapons to the Assad government despite the uprising. Human rights groups and activists say more than 7,000 people have been killed by Syrian security forces since the uprising began in March. The UN stopped estimating the death toll in Syria after it passed 5,400 in January, saying it was too difficult to confirm. The government says at least 2,000 members of the security forces have been killed combating armed gangs and terrorists. Egypt unrest, 2 shot dead in clashes after football deaths. 2 people have been killed and more than 400 injured in protest across Egypt, sparked by the deaths of 74 people after a football match. The 2 killed were shot dead by police trying to disperse angry crowds in the city of Suez, medical officials said. In the capital, Cairo, thousands of protesters remained on the streets following a day of clashes with police. Thousands marched to the Interior Ministry where security forces fired tear gas to keep them back. Earlier, the Egyptian Prime Minister announced the sackings of several senior officials. Funerals of some 74 victims took place in Port Said where the football match had been taking place on Wednesday. The deaths came when fans invaded the pitch after a fixture between top Cairo club Al Ahly and Port Said side Al Masri. As night fell in Cairo, several thousands of demonstrators remained in the streets around the Interior Ministry, witnesses said. In Suez, health official Mohammed Lashin said 2 people have been shot dead early on Friday. A witness quoted by Reuters said protesters are trying to break into the Suez police station and police are now firing live ammunition. Throughout Thursday, Al Ahly supporters gathered outside the club stadium in Cairo. A series of protest marches moved towards Tahrir Square and then on the Ministry of Interior. Some chanted slogans against Egypt's military rulers while others threw stones. Our army must choose between the military council and revolutionaries, they chanted. Police fired tear gas to keep the thousands of protesters away from the ministry, which is protected by concrete barricades. Motorcycles ferried the injured from the scene as ambulances were often unable to get through. At one point, ambulances intervened to rescue riot police whose vehicle mistakenly turned into a street full of protesters, Reuters reported. Egyptian state news agency MENA quoted a health ministry official as saying 388 protesters were injured. Most of them were suffering from tear gas inhalation and as well as bruises and broken bones from rock. Al Ahly supporters, known as Ultras, played a prominent role in last year's street protests which led to the overthrow of President Hosni Mubarak. Press reporters in Cairo says the Ultras believe they were targeted for their support for the revolution over the past year. They accuse the police deliberately allowing Al Masri fans to attack them. It's like war, you can't believe it. What happened yesterday, that means on Wednesday, was war, it's not football. To kill without any feeling is not normal, former Al Ahly player Hani Sadiq told the press. There were also protests in Port Said, Associated Press news agency. Malaria deaths hugely underestimated, Lancet study. Worldwide, malaria deaths may be almost twice as high as previously estimated, a study reports. The research published in the British medical journal, The Lancet, suggests 1.24 million people died from mosquito-borne diseases in 2010. This compares to a World Health Organization (WHO) estimate of 2010 of 6,55,000 deaths. But both the new study and the WHO indicate global death rates are now falling. The research was founded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. It's used in new data and new computer modeling to build a historical database for malaria between 1980 and 2010. The conclusion was that worldwide deaths has risen from 9,95,000 in 1980 to a peak of 1.82 million in 2004 before falling to 1.24 million in 2010. The rise in malaria deaths up to 2004 is attributed to a growth in populations at the risk of malaria, while the decline since 2004 is attributed to rapid scaling up of malaria control in Africa, supported by international donors. While most deaths were among young children in Africa, the researchers noted a higher proportion of deaths among older children and adults than previously estimated. In total, 4,33,000 more deaths occurred among children over 5 and adults in 2010 than in the WHO estimate. You learn in medical school that people exposed to malaria as children develop immunity and rarely die from malaria as adults, said Dr. Christopher Murray of University of Washington in Seattle, who led the study. What we have found in historical death records, surveys, and other sources shows that it's not just the case. The researchers just concluded malaria eradication was not possible in the short term. We estimated that if the decreases from the peak year 2004 continue, malaria mortality will decrease to less than 1 lakh deaths only after 2020, they write. The Lancet editor Richard Horton told the press, "Right now we don't actually have any reliable primary numbers for malaria deaths in some of the most malarious regions of the world, so what numbers we have come from estimates." What this paper reports is a new way of estimating the number of malaria deaths, where they used additional data sets and improved mathematical models from calculating mortality. Life term for Cambodia Khmer Rouge jailer Duch. Cambodia's UN-backed genocide court has rejected an appeal by Khmer Rouge jailer Duch and increased his sentence to life imprisonment. Dutch-born Kay Guek Eve was jailed in 2010 for his role in running a notorious prison where thousands of inmates were killed. He has appealed on the grounds that he was a junior official following orders, but judges rejected his claim and increased his sentence from 35 years to life. Duch, the first senior Khmer Rouge official to face charges before the court, was convicted of crimes against humanity in July 2010. He appealed against the verdict in March 2011. The 69-year-old was a commander of Tuol Sleng prison, where at least 15,000 men, women and children deemed enemies of the regime were tortured and then executed in killing fields outside Phnom Penh. He had argued that he should never have been tried, claiming that he was a junior official following his superior's orders on pain of death. Prosecutors meanwhile argued that his sentence was too lenient. Many survivors were outraged when he was sentenced to 35 years because he could be free in 18 years given time already served. The appeal court judges ruled that the initial prison term did not reflect the gravity of the crimes. The crimes by Kay Guek Eve were undoubtedly among the worst in recorded human history. They deserve the highest penalty available, Judge Nom Stream said. Hundreds of survivors gathered at the Phnom Penh court to hear the final verdict. Duch's case is the first to be concluded by the court against perpetrators of crimes committed during 4 years of Khmer Rouge rule in the late 1970s. The regime attempted to create an ideal communist society by forcing city residents to work as peasants in the countryside and by purging intellectuals, middle-class people, and any supposed enemies of the state. Up to 2 million people, about 1/3 of the population, are believed to have been killed or died of overwork and starvation.